The vampire king stood frozen in the doorway as the night nurse whispered a lullaby to his comatose son, tears streaming down her face. What he didn't know was that she'd been coming here every night for 3 months, singing the same song his dead queen once hummed. Now she'd seen him watching, and the fragile ritual that kept his son's heart beating hung by a thread. The antiseptic scent of the medical wing burned through Aldrich's nostrils as he pressed himself against the stone archway, watching the human woman bend over his son's still form. 6 months of watching Damien waste away had carved hollow spaces in his chest where hope used to live. But tonight, something felt different. The monitors hummed their steady rhythm, while Elena Martinez moved with practiced grace around the bed, her dark hair catching the pale blue glow of the life support systems. She had no idea that Vampire King eyes tracked her every gesture, cataloging the way she checked the IV lines and adjusted the pillow beneath Damien's head with infinite care. Her voice rose soft and melodic as she began the lullaby, tears already gathering at the corners of her eyes like they did every night for the past 3 months. The ancient words flowed from her lips in perfect cadence, each syllable pronounced with reverence she couldn't possibly understand. Aldrich's breath caught in his throat. The song was Isadora's song, the one his beloved queen had whispered to their son during his most violent episodes when the bloodlust threatened to consume his young mind. No living soul should know this melody. No human throat should form these sacred sounds. Yet Elena sang as if the words were carved into her very bones. The medical equipment around Damien's bed responded to her presence, the way flowers turn toward sunlight, his heart rate stabilizing, his breathing deepening into something that resembled peaceful sleep rather than the death-like stillness that had claimed him. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Aldrich watched in stunned silence as Elena's tears fell onto his son's pale skin, each droplet seeming to sink into the flesh and spread a subtle warmth through veins that had run cold for half a year. She reached out with trembling fingers to brush a strand of dark hair from Damien's forehead, her touch so gentle it barely disturbed the air above his skin, yet the prince's eyelids fluttered in response. The Vampire King had spent centuries mastering the art of perfect stillness, but shock made his boots scrape against stone. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror as she realized she was no longer alone. Her voice died mid-verse, the final notes of the lullaby dissolving into sudden silence that crashed through the room like a wave. Every monitor connected to Damien's body shrieked in alarm, numbers spiking red across screens that had shown steady green for months under Elena's unknowing care. Aldrich stepped from the shadows into the harsh fluorescent light, his massive frame filling the doorway as Elena scrambled backward, her hand reaching for the emergency call button. His voice came out rougher than intended, centuries of authority softened by desperate need. "You know the old song." Elena's mouth opened and closed without sound, her gaze darting between his face and the flashing alarms that announced his son's distress. The machine screamed louder as Damien's vital signs crashed toward dangerous levels, his body rejecting the sudden absence of whatever magic Elena's presence provided. She was young, perhaps 28, with intelligent brown eyes that held shadows of loss he recognized from his own reflection. Her scrubs were standard hospital issue, but worn soft from countless washings, practical shoes that had walked too many miles through suffering and hope. There was something in her face that spoke of someone who had seen death up close and chosen to stand against it anyway. "I learned it from my grandmother's journal," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the electronic chaos. She kept pressing her back against the far wall as if she could somehow disappear through solid stone. "I didn't know anyone else would recognize it. I just thought it was a pretty melody. Something about him reminds me of my brother. He died when I was 15. Similar condition." The monitors continued their frantic warnings, numbers dropping into ranges that made Aldrich's dead heart clench with familiar panic. He moved toward the bed with supernatural speed, his hands hovering over controls he had memorized through months of desperate vigil. His son's face was growing paler by the second, the subtle warmth Elena's presence had brought already fading like sunrise mist. She has been maintaining a life-sustaining spell. He realized with crystal clarity that cut through 6 months of confusion. Without understanding what she was doing, this human woman had been channeling the same protective magic Isadora had woven around their son, the ancient healing power that kept his hybrid nature in balance. If Elena stopped coming now, if fear drove her away from this room, Damien would die within hours. The thought moved through him like ice water in his veins. "Please," Elena said, her voice stronger now, as professional training overcame personal terror. "Let me help him. I don't understand what's happening, but I know he needs the song. I've been coming here every night after my shift, because something told me he was waiting." The alarms began to quiet as she approached the bed again, Damien's body responding to her proximity with the same mysterious recognition that had kept him alive through the darkest months. Aldrich studied her face, searching for signs of deception or supernatural influence, but found only genuine concern and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from caring too much in a world that offered too little hope. "You work in trauma," he said, not quite a question. She nodded, still watching Damien's face with the intense focus of someone trained to read the smallest changes in a patient's condition. Downtown General, night shift. "I transferred here 3 months ago when I heard about Prince Damien's case. They said he was beyond help, that his family had given up hope." Elena's gaze flicked to Aldrich's face, taking in the sharp angles and pale skin that marked him as something other than human. "I don't give up on people," she continued with quiet defiance, "even when everyone else does, especially then." The Vampire King felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced since Isadora's death 5 years ago. This mortal woman with her grandmother's journal and her stubborn refusal to abandon the hopeless had somehow become the thread keeping his son tethered to life. But the magic she wielded unknowingly was dangerous in ways she could not imagine, and continuing this arrangement would violate every treaty and protocol that governed supernatural medical care. The supernatural medical protocol existed for good reason, protecting humans from magical energies their bodies could not safely channel and preventing unauthorized intervention in vampire healing processes. If the council discovered what Elena had been doing, the consequences would be severe for both of them. Yet Damien's improved breathing told a story that medical science could not explain, and Aldrich found himself caught between law and love, duty and desperation. "I need you to understand the risk you are taking," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the authority of a king who had ruled through plague and war. "What you are doing here, this song, it is not just melody. It is magic, ancient and powerful, and it has been keeping my son alive when all other treatments failed. If you continue, you will be breaking laws that protect both our peoples. If you stop, he will die. The choice must be yours, but it must be made with full knowledge of what hangs in the balance." Elena's hand moved to rest against her throat, fingers tracing a pattern Aldrich suddenly recognized as the same protective gesture Isadora used to make when working complex healing magic. This woman carried more than just a grandmother's journal and a gentle heart. She carried bloodline magic in her very bones, power that had been thought lost to time and persecution. The Vampire King made a decision that would change everything. "I propose a bargain," he said, stepping closer to the bed where his son lay suspended between life and death. "Continue your visits, but under my protection and with full knowledge of what you are doing. In exchange, I will tell you the truth about Prince Damien's condition and help you understand the gift that flows through your veins. Together, we may find a way to fully heal him and unlock secrets that have been buried for generations." Elena looked down at Damien's peaceful face, then back at the vampire king, whose desperation matched her own determination to save lives others had written off as lost. She nodded slowly, sealing an agreement that would bind their fates together in ways neither could foresee. Above them, hidden in the shadows of the medical wing's security system, cameras recorded every word and gesture, uploading footage that would soon reach eyes that watched for exactly this kind of forbidden cooperation between human healers and vampire royalty. The fourth night brought rain against the medical wing windows, each droplet catching the pale light like tears frozen in glass. Elena arrived earlier than usual, her scrubs still damp from the storm outside, carrying the leather-bound journal that had belonged to her grandmother, Isabella. Aldrich waited in the chair he had claimed beside his son's bed, no longer hiding in shadows but positioned where he could watch both Damien's face and Elena's hands as she worked. The Vampire King had spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of emotional distance, but grief had stripped away those careful defenses, leaving him raw and desperate for answers that only this mortal woman seemed able to provide. "Your grandmother's journal," he said as Elena settled into her routine of checking monitors and adjusting IV lines. "May I see it?" She hesitated for a moment, then placed the worn book in his pale hands, watching his expression shift from curiosity to stunned recognition as he opened to pages filled with familiar symbols and half-remembered incantations. "These are lunar healing glyphs," Aldrich whispered, his finger tracing a diagram that matched tattoos he had seen on his beloved queen's skin. "Your grandmother knew the old magic." Elena pulled her chair closer, close enough that he could smell the rain in her hair and the faint scent of hospital antiseptic that clung to her clothes. "She wrote about dreams," Elena said softly. "Dreams of a vampire queen who taught her songs that could heal the darkness in supernatural hearts. I always thought they were just stories, fairy tales she made up to help me sleep after my parents died." Aldrich's breath caught in his throat because he remembered those dreams, remembered Isadora speaking of a human woman who appeared in her meditations, someone who carried the bloodline of the ancient healers but lived hidden among ordinary mortals. "Your grandmother was real to my queen," he said, his voice rough with emotion that had been buried for 5 years. "Isadora used to speak of her, called her the bridge walker because she moved between our world and yours without belonging fully to either. The lullaby you sing was born from their connection, woven with protection magic that only Isabella's bloodline could activate." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, fingers tracing the same protective pattern Aldrich had noticed before. "Then when Queen Isadora died," Elena began, understanding dawning in her dark eyes like sunrise after the longest night. "The magic began to fade because there was no one left who knew how to maintain it. Except for Isabella's granddaughter, who inherited the gift without knowing what it was." Aldrich nodded, watching Elena's face as pieces fell into place like fragments of a shattered spell finally finding their proper configuration. "Isadora died 5 years ago during the Crimson Plague outbreak," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of old grief and fresh hope. "She sacrificed herself to create a barrier between our realm and the infected territories, but her death left Damien vulnerable. His hybrid nature requires constant magical balance, the kind only lunar healing can provide. When he attempted to use his inherited healing powers 6 months ago to save human victims of a supernatural attack, the magical feedback nearly destroyed him because the protective spells were already weakening." Elena reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing against Aldrich's hand where it rested on the journal's cover. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through both of them, a spark of recognition that spoke of connections deeper than circumstance or coincidence. "I've been dreaming about Queen Isadora since I started coming here," Elena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She shows me how to weave light through song, how to bind healing magic with human love in ways that strengthen rather than drain. The dreams feel more real than my waking hours sometimes." Aldrich's grip tightened on the journal as hope bloomed in his chest like a flower growing through stone. Isadora had always possessed the gift of reaching across the veil between life and death when the need was great enough, and if she was guiding Elena now, it meant the magic they had built together still lived in ways that defied mortal understanding. The vampire king began to speak of his queen, words flowing like water from a spring that had been dammed too long. Isadora was born human, but transformed by vampire magic that merged with her healing bloodline instead of consuming it, he said, watching Elena's eyes widen as the story unfolded. She could walk in sunlight without burning, heal both vampire and human ailments, and weave protection spells that lasted for generations. Her love saved our people from the plague, but it also saved them from the darkness that comes with immortality. She taught us that power without compassion becomes poison, that strength without mercy leads only to destruction. Elena listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for critical patients, absorbing every detail like someone learning to read a map of her own heritage. The monitors around Damien's bed hummed steadily, no longer spiking with alarm when Elena's presence brought comfort to the unconscious prince. As the nights passed, their conversations deepened into something neither had expected. Elena spoke of her childhood with Isabella, of learning to read people's pain in their eyes, and choosing nursing because healing felt like the only worthwhile response to a world full of suffering. She revealed that she had walked away from a prestigious position at Metropolitan General Hospital to take night shifts specifically for cases like Damien's, patients everyone else had written off as hopeless. Aldrich found himself sharing memories he had locked away for decades, stories of ruling through wars and plagues, of making impossible choices between duty and heart, of watching his people struggle with the curse and blessing of immortality. Elena saw past the crown and the centuries to the man underneath, the father who would do anything to save his son, the widower who carried his grief like a second shadow. Something beautiful began growing in the space between them, fragile as new leaves but strong as ancient roots. Damien responded to their combined presence with subtle improvements that medical science could not explain, but magical intuition recognized as genuine progress. His color improved from deathly pale to merely wan, his breathing deepened from mechanical necessity to natural rhythm, and sometimes his eyelids fluttered as if he were trying to surface from the depths of enchanted sleep. Elena began bringing her grandmother's journal every night, and together she and Aldrich deciphered healing techniques that had been lost for generations. They discovered that Isabella had documented not just songs and spells, but prophecies about a coming supernatural war and the crucial role that human-vampire magical bonds would play in preventing catastrophe. The journal spoke of darkness rising from old wounds, of supernatural factions that sought to break the careful treaties that kept their world hidden from human notice, and of healers who would stand as bridges between realms when diplomacy failed and magic became the only weapon against chaos. Meanwhile, eyes that should not have been watching began to take notice of irregularities in Prince Damien's care. Dr. Marcus Webb, head of Supernatural Medical Affairs, reviewed monthly reports with the meticulous attention of someone trained to spot anomalies in the careful balance between human medicine and supernatural healing. Damien's sudden stabilization after months of steady decline raised questions that demanded answers, especially when the improvements coincided with unauthorized human presence in restricted vampire medical facilities. Elena's supervisor, Chief Nurse Patricia Hawkins, noticed the extra hours her best trauma nurse was spending in the supernatural wing, and the way Elena's usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by something deeper and more focused, as if she were carrying secrets too important to share. Lord Victor Blackthorne, ambitious and calculating member of Aldrich's royal council, watched his king with growing suspicion as Aldrich's nightly disappearances and distracted manner during court sessions suggested emotional entanglements that could be exploited for political gain. Victor had spent decades positioning himself as the voice of vampire tradition and purity, and any sign that the king was compromising supernatural security for human sentiment would provide the ammunition needed to challenge Aldrich's fitness to rule. In security rooms hidden deep within the medical complex, footage of Elena and Aldrich's late-night meetings was reviewed by analysts whose loyalty belonged to factions that valued power over healing and saw cooperation between species as weakness rather than strength. The recording showed intimate conversations, shared touches, and magical energies that violated multiple treaties governing supernatural medical protocols. Plans began forming in shadows and whispered meetings, strategies designed to use Elena and Aldrich's growing bond as a weapon against everything they were trying to protect. The investigation moved forward with the inexorable precision of a trap closing around its prey, while Elena and Aldrich remained focused on healing Damien and uncovering the secrets hidden in Isabella's journal, unaware that their every word and gesture was being catalogued as evidence of dangerous violations that could destroy not just their fragile connection, but the careful peace between human and supernatural realms that had taken centuries to build. The revelation came at 3 in the morning when Elena discovered a hidden compartment in her grandmother's journal, the leather cover giving way to reveal pages written in silver ink that gleamed under the medical wing's fluorescent lights. Aldrich leaned closer as Elena carefully unfolded the delicate parchment, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the electric sensation that coursed through her fingertips the moment she touched the ancient writing. The words were in multiple languages, some human tongues she recognized, others in the flowing script of Old Vampiric that Aldrich had taught her to read during their nightly vigils beside Damien's bed. Isabella Martinez was not simply a human healer who stumbled upon vampire magic through dreams and intuition. The silver text revealed in flowing handwriting that matched the lullaby notations exactly. She was Queen Isidora's human mentor and the last officially recognized keeper of the lunar healing arts, a bloodline position that stretched back through centuries of careful breeding and magical cultivation. The journal documented Isabella's training at the ancient Moonhaven Academy, her formal induction into the circle of bridgewalkers, and her sacred duty to maintain the magical balance between human and vampire realms through healing arts that required both mortal compassion and immortal wisdom. Elena read aloud with growing amazement and terror as the truth of her heritage unfolded like a map to a country she never knew existed. The lullaby she had been singing was not just a protective spell, but a genetic magical key that could only be activated by Isabella's direct bloodline. Each note calibrated to the specific magical frequency that ran through Martinez's family DNA like a hidden river of power. This explained why Elena's presence alone could sustain the complex enchantment keeping Damien alive, why her touch brought warmth to his cold skin, and why her voice could weave healing magic without conscious training or effort. The journal revealed that Isabella had faked her own death during the supernatural purges of the 1940s, when human governments and rogue supernatural factions worked together to eliminate magical bloodlines they viewed as too dangerous to exist. She had hidden among ordinary mortals, married a human man, and raised her daughter to believe their family was perfectly normal, breaking a bloodline tradition that stretched back to the first vampire courts in medieval Europe. Elena's mother had lived and died without ever knowing she carried dormant magical abilities that would manifest fully in her daughter when the need became desperate enough. Aldrich's face grew pale as he absorbed the implications of Elena's true identity, understanding flooding through him like ice water in his veins. Elena was not simply helping his son recover from a magical accident. She was the key to restoring the balance between human and vampire realms, the missing piece of an ancient system that had kept their peoples in harmony for over 1,000 years. Her bloodline carried the ability to heal not just individual supernatural beings, but the magical fabric that connected all paranormal communities, the hidden network of energy and understanding that prevented warfare between species and maintained the careful treaties that kept their worlds secret from human detection. However, The journal also contained dire warnings written in Isabella's increasingly desperate handwriting as she realized the forces hunting her bloodline would never stop searching for any survivors. Using lunar healing magic marked Elena as a target for supernatural factions who believed this magical line was extinct and wanted to keep it that way, groups who saw bridgewalkers as threats to their own power and independence. The very abilities that made Elena capable of healing Damien also made her a weapon that could upset the careful balance of supernatural politics, a living key that could unlock magical secrets some factions had spent centuries trying to bury. Elena closed the journal with hands that shook from more than exhaustion, finally understanding why she had always felt like she belonged somewhere else, why hospital work felt like a pale shadow of something greater she was meant to do, and why touching Damien brought not just medical satisfaction, but a sense of completing some cosmic pattern that had been broken long before her birth. Aldrich reached for her hand, his immortal strength offering what comfort he could, as they both realized that Elena's nights of innocent healing had awakened forces that would stop at nothing to eliminate the last bridgewalker before she could fully claim her heritage. The Vampire King had thought he was simply saving his son, but he had actually helped resurrect a magical tradition that could reshape the supernatural world or destroy it completely, depending on who gained control of Elena's unprecedented abilities. 3 floors below the medical wing, Dr. Marcus Webb sat in his sterile office reviewing security footage and medical records with the methodical precision of a prosecuting attorney building an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming and damning beyond any possibility of innocent explanation. Unauthorized human presence in restricted supernatural medical facilities, magical energy readings that spiked whenever Elena Martinez was near Prince Damien, and most damning of all, clear documentation of vampiric royal family members engaging in illegal magical practices with unregistered human personnel. Webb's report to the Supernatural Council read like a catalog of treaty violations, each incident carefully documented with timestamps, witness statements, and photographic evidence that left no room for denial or diplomatic maneuvering. King Aldrich Ravencrest had violated the Treaty of Shadows in multiple ways, allowing unauthorized human magical practice, sharing classified supernatural medical information with civilian personnel, and compromising the security of vampire royal bloodlines through emotional entanglement with mortal operatives. Lord Victor Blackthorne received Webb's preliminary findings with the satisfaction of a chess master watching his opponent walk into a carefully prepared trap. For decades, Victor had positioned himself as the champion of vampire purity and traditional values, building support among council members who believed Aldrich's progressive policies were weakening their people's strength and independence. The king's human weakness provided exactly the ammunition Victor needed to challenge Aldrich's fitness to rule, proof that personal sentiment had corrupted the judgment of someone entrusted with protecting all vampire interests. Victor called an emergency council session for the following evening, his announcement carefully worded to suggest urgent threats to supernatural security that required immediate action. Elena arrived for her shift at Downtown General to find Chief Nurse Patricia Hawkins waiting with a disciplinary committee and a stack of papers that would effectively end her nursing career. The hospital had received complaints about Elena's unauthorized overtime in the supernatural wing, her failure to properly document patient interactions, and suspicious irregularities in her work schedule that suggested possible involvement in illegal supernatural activities. Elena faced immediate suspension pending a full investigation, potential criminal charges for practicing supernatural medicine without proper certification, and mandatory psychological evaluation to determine whether she had been influenced by vampire mental manipulation techniques. The trap that had been closing around her and Aldrich for weeks finally snapped shut with bureaucratic efficiency, each accusation supported by evidence that would be impossible to refute without revealing the truth about her magical abilities. The investigation also uncovered disturbing evidence that Damien's original attack had not been random supernatural violence, but a carefully orchestrated magical assault designed to eliminate both the prince and any remaining lunar healers who might respond to his distress. Someone with intimate knowledge of vampire royal magical signatures and human healing bloodlines had engineered the feedback loop that put Damien into his coma, using the prince as bait to draw out hidden bridgewalkers who could then be identified and eliminated. Elena's rescue of Damien had saved his life, but also exposed her existence to the same forces that had tried to kill him, marking her as the primary target in a supernatural war that had been raging in secret for decades. Faced with losing everything she had worked for and everyone she had grown to love, Elena stood in her apartment 3 hours before dawn, staring at a bus ticket to Vancouver that would take her far from the supernatural politics that threatened to consume her. She could disappear among ordinary humans, suppress her emerging magical abilities, and live the safe, anonymous life her grandmother had chosen when the world became too dangerous for bridgewalkers to exist openly. Aldrich appeared at her door without invitation, his vampire nature allowing him to move through locks and barriers like they were mere suggestions, his desperate need overriding centuries of ingrained respect for human privacy and autonomy. He offered her the one protection he could provide, the chance to become vampire herself and gain the immortal strength needed to survive the supernatural forces arrayed against her. But Elena realized with crystal clarity that vampiric transformation would destroy the human life force that powered her healing abilities, turning her into just another immortal refugee from a magical tradition that was already dying from neglect and persecution. Meanwhile, Damien's condition deteriorated with frightening speed as the protective magic Elena had been maintaining began to unravel. Without her nightly presence and healing songs, the prince slipped deeper into coma, his vital signs crashing toward levels that no amount of medical intervention could stabilize. The vampire royal medical team worked frantically to keep him alive, but their science-based treatments could not replace the lunar healing magic that had been sustaining him for months. Elena and Aldrich discovered through desperate research in Isabella's journal that the only permanent solution was for Elena to perform a complete lunar healing ceremony, a 3-night ritual that would fully activate her bridgewalker abilities and create a permanent magical bond between her bloodline and Damien's hybrid nature. However, the ceremony would also reveal Elena's existence and location to every supernatural faction in the world, sending out magical signals that could be detected from thousands of miles away by anyone trained to recognize Bridgewalker energy signatures. Performing the ritual would save Damien's life, but paint a target on Elena's back that would follow her for the rest of her dramatically shortened mortal existence, making her the center of a supernatural war between those who wanted to use her abilities and those who wanted to eliminate her before she could upset the current balance of power. Elena stood at her window watching the sun rise over a city that contained both ordinary human lives and hidden supernatural societies, knowing that whatever choice she made would change everything for everyone she had grown to love, and that the innocent nights of singing lullabies to a dying prince had awakened forces that would reshape the paranormal world, whether she participated willingly or spent the rest of her life running from the consequences of her grandmother's hidden legacy. Elena's decision came with the weight of destiny settling across her shoulders like a cloak woven from starlight and shadow. Standing in the abandoned cathedral that housed the ancient healing chamber beneath Ravencrest Castle, she pressed her palm against the stone altar where Queen Isadora had once channeled the same lunar healing magic that now pulsed through Elena's veins with increasing urgency. The chamber had been sealed for 5 years since Isadora's death, its walls carved with protective symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light as Elena's presence awakened long-dormant magical currents. Captain Sarah Nightwind, Aldrich's most trusted guard and one of the few vampires who remembered the old ways, had risked her own position to help them access this sacred space, her loyalty to the royal family outweighing her concern for supernatural protocol. The healing chamber existed outside normal space and time, a pocket of concentrated magical energy where the boundaries between life and death became permeable enough for Bridgewalker magic to function at its full potential. Damien lay unconscious on the altar, his breathing so shallow it barely registered on the portable monitors they had smuggled down from the medical wing, his skin pale as winter moonlight and cold to the touch, despite the warming spells Aldrich maintained around his son's failing body. Elena had only one night before the Supernatural Council's enforcement team would arrive to arrest her, and Victor's political maneuvering would make any rescue impossible. But the complete lunar healing ceremony traditionally required 3 nights under the new moon to safely channel the massive energies needed to permanently heal hybrid magical damage. She would have to compress the entire ritual into a single session, pushing her untrained abilities beyond any safe limits and risking magical burnout that could kill her before she finished saving Damien. Aldrich watched from the chamber's edge, his immortal composure cracking as he witnessed Elena prepare for a ritual that might cost her life to save his sons, the impossible choice between two people he had grown to love, tearing at his heart with claws of ice and fire. Elena opened her grandmother's journal to the pages describing the full ceremony, silver ink shimmering as the ancient words responded to the chamber's concentrated magical field. The ritual required her to create a direct life force connection between herself and Damien, sharing her human vitality through an intricate magical binding that would allow her lunar healing abilities to repair the damage that conventional vampire medicine could not touch. She began with the preparatory chants, her voice echoing off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of magical workings, each syllable carefully pronounced according to Isabella's detailed instructions. The chamber responded to her words like a musical instrument being tuned, harmonics building in the air until the very stones seemed to sing with contained power. Elena placed her hands on Damien's chest, feeling his heartbeat flutter against her palms like a caged bird desperate for freedom, and began the delicate process of extending her consciousness into his damaged magical matrix. What she found there horrified her beyond anything Isabella's warnings had prepared her to encounter. Damien was not simply unconscious from magical feedback, he was actively fighting a dark curse that had been woven into the attack that nearly killed him. Supernatural malevolence designed to slowly drain his life force, while making his condition appear like a natural consequence of magical overextension. The curse bore the signature of someone with intimate knowledge of vampire royal bloodline magic, someone who had studied Damien's hybrid nature closely enough to craft a weapon specifically designed to exploit his unique vulnerabilities. Elena realized with growing horror that the attack on Damien had been a deliberate assassination attempt disguised as accidental magical backlash, part of a larger conspiracy that she was only beginning to understand. The curse fought her attempts at healing like a living thing, tendrils of dark magic trying to infect her own life force as she struggled to untangle the malevolent spell from Damien's damaged magical core. Her grandmother's training echoed in her mind as she worked, Isabella's voice guiding her through techniques for purifying corrupted magical energy and rebuilding damaged supernatural systems from their fundamental components. Hours passed in the timeless space of the healing chamber, Elena's strength slowly draining as she poured her human vitality into the monumental task of undoing months of magical sabotage while simultaneously healing the prince's original injuries. Aldrich remained perfectly still, not daring to interfere with the delicate magical balance Elena was maintaining, his enhanced senses tracking every fluctuation in her heartbeat and breathing as she pushed herself closer to the edge of what mortal flesh could endure. The second night's work progressed with agonizing slowness, Elena's consciousness deep within Damien's magical matrix as she carefully rebuilt the protective barriers that should have prevented any curse from taking hold in the first place. She was so focused on the intricate magical repairs that she did not notice the approach of footsteps in the corridor outside the healing chamber, the sound of multiple supernatural beings moving with military precision toward their hidden sanctuary. Lord Victor Blackthorne entered the chamber with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages, flanked by Dr. Boyke, Webb, and a squad of supernatural marshals whose authority superseded even royal prerogatives when supernatural law had been violated. Victor's handsome face bore the satisfied expression of a chess master, watching his opponent realize they had been outmaneuvered from the very beginning, his pale eyes taking in the scene with cold calculation that spoke of years spent planning this exact moment. Behind him came supernatural enforcement officers trained to handle magical emergencies, their specialized equipment designed to contain and neutralize unauthorized bridgewalker activities before they could destabilize the careful balance of supernatural politics. Elena looked up from the altar where Damien lay partially healed, her face streaked with exhaustion and the silver tears that came from channeling too much lunar healing magic through mortal channels not designed for such intense supernatural energy. Victor's revelation came with the casual cruelty of someone who had spent decades perfecting his betrayal, his voice carrying across the ancient chamber with aristocratic precision that made each word feel like a blade sliding between ribs. The attack on Prince Damien had been Victor's masterwork, a magical assault designed to appear accidental while actually serving multiple strategic purposes that would elevate him from ambitious counselor to undisputed vampire king. He had hired supernatural assassins to eliminate any remaining lunar healers who might respond to Damien's magical distress, but Isabella had hidden her family's identity too thoroughly for even professional killers to trace the bloodline through 3 generations of careful anonymity. Victor's original plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Let Damien die from the curse while documenting Aldrich's increasingly desperate violations of supernatural law as the king's grief drove him to make choices that proved his unfitness to rule. The emergence of Elena Martinez as a practicing bridgewalker had actually improved Victor's strategy, providing concrete evidence of Aldrich's willingness to compromise vampire security for human sentiment and giving Victor legal grounds to challenge the throne through established council procedures. Dr. Webb stepped forward with arrest warrants signed by the Supernatural Council's Emergency Tribunal, charges that would effectively end Elena's freedom and Aldrich's reign, while positioning Victor as the strong leader needed to restore traditional vampire values in an increasingly dangerous world. The healing chamber erupted into chaos as Aldrich's loyal guards, led by Captain Sarah, clashed with Victor's supernatural marshals in a battle that sent magical energy crackling through the air like lightning trapped in a stone box. Elena found herself caught in the center of a supernatural war, her partially completed ritual holding Damien suspended between life and death, while violence raged around the ancient altar where Queen Isadora had once worked miracles that saved entire populations. Spells and ancient weapons filled the air with deadly light as vampires who had served together for centuries turned against each other, loyalty to competing visions of their people's future overriding bonds forged through decades of shared struggle. Victor's supporters fought with the desperate efficiency of conspirators whose careful plans were finally reaching fruition, while Aldrich's forces battled to protect not just their king, but the last hope for healing magic that could bridge the growing divide between supernatural factions and human civilization. Elena made her choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next, her hands returning to Damien's chest as she poured the remainder of her life force into completing the ritual regardless of the consequences to her own survival. The lunar healing ceremony reached its crescendo as magical energy built beyond anything the chamber had contained since Isadora's time. Silver light pouring from Elena's skin as she channeled power that transformed her from mortal woman into living bridge between realms of existence that were never meant to touch. Damien's eyes opened for the first time in 6 months, not the confused awakening of someone emerging from medical coma, but the focused awareness of a being whose magical abilities had been not just restored, but amplified beyond their original potential. Elena's lunar healing had not simply cured Damien's curse, but activated dormant aspects of his hybrid heritage, awakening powers that combined his mother's healing magic with his father's vampiric strength in ways that created something entirely new in the supernatural world. The young prince rose from the altar with fluid grace that spoke of perfect magical balance. His consciousness expanded to encompass not just the healing chamber, but the entire network of supernatural energy that connected every paranormal being within a 100-mile radius. Victor's treachery became visible to Damien's enhanced perception like words written in fire across the fabric of reality. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed his family revealed in its full scope and malevolent complexity. With power that made the air itself sing with harmonics, Damien exposed Victor's crimes to every supernatural being in the chamber, projecting images and emotions directly into their minds with a combination of vampire mental influence and Bridgewalker truth-seeing that left no room for deception or political maneuvering. The supernatural marshals found themselves facing not just evidence of Victor's guilt, but absolute certainty that they had been manipulated into serving someone whose ambitions threatened the very foundations of supernatural society. However, Elena's triumph came at a cost that turned victory into tragedy before anyone could celebrate Damien's recovery. The massive magical energies she had channeled through her human body had burned out her mortal life force like a candle exposed to hurricane winds, leaving her collapsed beside the altar with skin that felt cold as winter stone, and eyes that were already losing focus as her consciousness began to drift toward whatever waited beyond the boundaries of living flesh. Aldrich reached her side in time to catch her falling body, his immortal strength useless against the fundamental incompatibility between mortal biology and the cosmic forces Elena had wielded to save his son. The horrible irony that healing Damien might have cost him the woman whose love had become as essential to his existence as blood itself. The Supernatural Council convened an emergency session within 48 hours of Victor's exposure. Their ancient chamber beneath Geneva, filled with representatives from every major paranormal faction, as they struggled to contain the political earthquake that threatened to shatter centuries of carefully maintained supernatural governance. Lord Victor Blackthorn sat in magical restraints that prevented him from using his vampiric abilities while evidence of his conspiracy played out in holographic detail above the council floor. Each revelation more damaging than the last, to the delicate balance of trust that kept their hidden world from descending into open warfare. High Chancellor Morgana Ashworth, a vampire elder who had guided supernatural politics through 2 world wars, and the technological revolution that made secrecy increasingly difficult, called for testimony with the grim efficiency of someone who understood that the wrong decision could trigger supernatural civil war within days. Victor's attempted coup had exposed fundamental weaknesses in the council's structure that enemy factions would certainly exploit, while his manipulation of supernatural law enforcement agencies raised questions about how deeply the conspiracy had penetrated their most trusted institutions. Other vampire houses sent representatives who questioned Aldrich's judgment with increasing boldness, their centuries-old grievances surfacing like poison from infected wounds as they seized the opportunity to challenge a king whose progressive policies had always made traditional vampires uncomfortable. House Shadowmere called for Aldrich's immediate abdication, claiming his emotional compromises with human interests had created the security vulnerabilities that Victor exploited, while House Bloodthorn demanded an investigation into whether Aldrich's relationship with Elena constituted treasonous collaboration with unregistered supernatural practitioners. The political damage spread through supernatural society like wildfire. Vampire nobles who had quietly resented Aldrich's reforms, now speaking openly of the need for stronger leadership that would prioritize vampiric superiority over dangerous experiments in interspecies cooperation. Meanwhile, Elena lay unconscious in the same medical chamber where she had first sung to Damien, her body struggling to survive the massive magical energies she had channeled through human physiology never designed for bridgewalker powers at full intensity. The royal medical team worked around the clock to stabilize her condition, but her vital signs fluctuated wildly as her nervous system fought to process supernatural forces that had burned through her mortal flesh like acid through silk. Aldrich maintained his vigil beside her bed, with the desperate focus of someone watching their entire world balance on the edge of a blade, his vampire senses tracking every fluctuation in her heartbeat, while his mind wrestled with the horrible possibility that saving his son might have cost him the woman whose love had become essential to his existence. Damien recovered from his magical ordeal with supernatural speed, but his emotional state proved far more fragile than his restored physical health, as the full implications of his mother's death and Elena's sacrifice crashed through his consciousness like waves against crumbling stone. The prince had awoken, not just healed, but fundamentally changed, his hybrid nature now fully integrated with magical abilities that allowed him to perceive supernatural energy patterns across vast distances and sense the emotional resonance of every paranormal being within his expanded awareness. However, this enhanced perception came with devastating clarity about the forces that had shaped his life, including the true circumstances of Queen Isidora's death 5 years earlier, and the way Victor had manipulated subsequent events to position himself as Aldrich's eventual successor. Damien's testimony before the emergency tribunal proved crucial to understanding the full scope of Victor's conspiracy, his enhanced abilities allowing him to project perfect sensory memories of the magical attack that had nearly killed him, and trace the curse's origins back through layers of supernatural concealment to its source. The young prince described Victor's assault with clinical precision that left no room for doubt or political maneuvering, showing how the ambitious lord had studied Damien's hybrid physiology for years to craft a weapon specifically designed to exploit the vulnerabilities created by his dual nature. More disturbing still, Damien's expanded consciousness revealed that Victor's conspiracy extended far beyond simple political ambition into a comprehensive plan to destabilize supernatural society through coordinated attacks on the institutions that maintained peace between paranormal factions. The investigation that followed Victor's exposure uncovered a network of supernatural terrorists that included rogue werewolf packs seeking to reclaim territory lost during the Great Treaty negotiations, displaced supernatural refugees who blamed vampire leadership for their exile from traditional homelands, and human hate groups that had somehow gained access to classified information about paranormal society. These unlikely allies had been united by Victor's promises of a new supernatural order that would eliminate the complex diplomatic structures requiring cooperation between species and return to the simpler dynamics of might determining right that had characterized the Dark Ages before modern supernatural governance. Aldrich and Damien worked together for the first time since the prince's childhood, their investigation taking them deep into the underground networks that connected supernatural dissidents across multiple continents as they raced to prevent attacks that could expose the entire paranormal world to human discovery. The conspiracy's scope proved breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its sophistication, involving planned simultaneous strikes on human hospitals where supernatural patients received treatment, vampire strongholds that housed ancient magical artifacts, and the diplomatic facilities where treaties between paranormal factions were negotiated and maintained. Captain Sarah Nightwind led tactical teams in raids across 3 countries, uncovering weapons caches that combined human military technology with supernatural enchantments capable of causing massive casualties among both mortal and immortal populations. The safe houses they raided revealed detailed intelligence about supernatural medical facilities, diplomatic compounds, and the personal information of Bridgewalker bloodlines that Victor's agents had been systematically hunting for decades. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of how close the conspiracy had come to triggering supernatural war on a scale that would have made secrecy impossible and forced paranormal society into open conflict with human governments that possessed increasingly sophisticated methods for detecting and combating supernatural threats. During the 3 weeks of investigation and testimony, Elena fought for survival in a magical coma that physicians described as fundamentally different from anything they had encountered in centuries of supernatural medicine. Her human nervous system was slowly adapting to permanent changes caused by channeling bridgewalker magic at intensities that should have killed her instantly, creating new neural pathways that would allow her to perceive and manipulate supernatural energies without the devastating physical cost she had paid to save Damien's life. The transformation proceeded unpredictably, her vital signs spiking and crashing as her brain rewired itself to accommodate abilities that bridged the gap between human intuition and vampiric magical perception in ways that had never been documented in surviving Bridgewalker texts. Aldrich watched over her recovery with the patient devotion of someone who understood that the woman he had fallen in love with might awaken as someone fundamentally different. Her consciousness expanded beyond normal human parameters, but possibly alienated from the mortal concerns and emotional patterns that had made her compassionate enough to risk everything for his son's life. Elena's awakening came gradually, her consciousness surfacing through layers of supernatural sensation that overwhelmed her newly enhanced nervous system with information about magical energy patterns, emotional resonances, and spiritual connections that normal human perception could never detect. She could sense Aldrich's desperate love like warmth radiating from his skin, feel Damien's gratitude and guilt as physical pressure against her enhanced awareness, and perceive the complex web of supernatural politics surrounding their situation as a symphony of competing intentions and hidden agendas that made normal hospital politics seem simple by comparison. Her nursing skills had been amplified by intuitive healing abilities that allowed her to diagnose supernatural ailments through empathic connection and guide magical energies through her patient's systems with unprecedented precision. But the constant psychic input from every paranormal being within her, expanded sensory range, threatened to drive her insane if she could not learn to filter and control her new abilities. Damien proved invaluable in helping Elena master her transformed capabilities, his own recent experience with magical enhancement giving him insights into the psychological adjustments required when human consciousness expanded beyond normal parameters. The prince worked with Elena daily, teaching her meditation techniques inherited from his mother's bridgewalker training and sharing magical exercises that helped her build mental barriers against the overwhelming flood of supernatural information that threatened to consume her sanity. Their collaboration revealed that Elena's transformation had created not just enhanced healing abilities, but a unique form of empathic bridge that could connect supernatural beings across species barriers, potentially revolutionizing diplomatic relations between paranormal factions that had struggled with communication difficulties for centuries. However, Damien's gratitude toward Elena carried undertones of responsibility and guilt that complicated their working relationship. The young prince, acutely aware that her sacrifice had saved his life, at costs she was still discovering, as her altered consciousness adapted to abilities that would forever separate her from the normal human existence she had known before meeting his family. Aldrich realized with growing certainty that Elena's transformation made returning to her previous life impossible, her enhanced supernatural perception marking her as permanently changed in ways that would make normal human relationships and conventional nursing work feel hollow and meaningless after experiencing the deeper magical connections now available to her consciousness. The question remained whether Elena would choose to embrace her new nature or struggle against changes that had been forced upon her through circumstances beyond her control, and whether their love could survive the transformation that had saved his son, while fundamentally altering the woman whose ordinary humanity had first drawn his immortal heart toward hope and healing. Elena's proposal for a joint medical council emerged from insights gained during her magical coma, visions of supernatural energy networks that revealed disturbing instabilities threatening both human and paranormal realms. Standing before the assembled representatives of the Human Supernatural Relations Committee and the International Vampire Court, she presented evidence that traditional separation between human medicine and supernatural healing was creating dangerous magical imbalances that could cascade into catastrophic failures affecting both species. Her enhanced perception allowed her to see the connections between seemingly unrelated supernatural incidents across the globe, a pattern of magical disruption that stemmed from the gradual breakdown of cooperation between human healers and vampire medical practitioners that had maintained cosmic balance for centuries before modern politics forced artificial divisions between their methodologies. The data she presented painted a frightening picture of reality itself becoming unstable as the fundamental forces that connected human life energy with supernatural magical systems began to fragment under the strain of enforced separation. Elena's near-death experience during Damien's healing had granted her unprecedented access to the cosmic infrastructure underlying all supernatural phenomena, revealing that Bridgewalker bloodlines served not just as healers, but as essential components in a vast magical ecosystem that required regular maintenance through human-vampire cooperation to prevent reality-threatening instabilities. The proposed Healing Council would formalize cooperation between human physicians trained in supernatural medicine, vampire healers specializing in cross-species treatment, and Bridgewalker practitioners who could safely channel the energies needed to maintain the delicate balance between mortal and immortal realms. Elena envisioned integrated treatment centers where human medical technology could enhance vampire healing magic, while lunar healing techniques provided the bridging energies needed to safely mix methodologies that had been artificially separated by centuries of political paranoia. Aldrich supported the proposal with the full weight of his royal authority, but approval required navigating complex diplomatic negotiations between human governments increasingly aware of supernatural society and vampire courts that viewed human involvement in their affairs as inherent security risks. The International Vampire Court demanded extensive safeguards to prevent human medical personnel from gaining access to classified supernatural biological information, while human governmental representatives insisted on oversight mechanisms that would prevent vampire medical practices from violating human ethical standards or constitutional rights. Elena began training potential healers while the political negotiations continued, working with candidates who showed aptitude for sensing supernatural energies and teaching them basic bridgewalker techniques that could enhance conventional healing without requiring the dangerous magical transformations she had undergone. Her students included human nurses and doctors willing to expand their practice into supernatural medicine, young vampires interested in healing rather than traditional vampiric pursuits, and hybrid beings whose mixed heritage made them natural bridges between different magical systems. Damien proved invaluable in developing safety protocols that would allow human practitioners to work with vampire magical healing without risking the kind of catastrophic energy feedback that had nearly killed both Elena and himself. His enhanced abilities, providing detailed analysis of the energy patterns involved in successful cross-species medical collaboration. The prince's experience with magical transformation gave him unique insights into the psychological adjustments required when human consciousness expanded to accommodate supernatural perception, knowledge that proved essential for preparing Elena's students to handle abilities that could overwhelm unprepared minds. Their collaborative work revealed that proper human-vampire medical cooperation required not just technical knowledge, but emotional preparation for the intimacy that developed when healers shared life energy across species barriers, connections that created lasting bonds between practitioners and patients that conventional medicine could not duplicate. However, the political challenges proved as dangerous as the magical ones, with resistance coming from both supernatural traditionalists who viewed human involvement as contamination of vampire purity and human medical establishment figures who saw supernatural healing practices as threats to evidence-based medicine. Elena faced constant scrutiny from medical licensing boards investigating her unconventional methods, while vampire nobles pressured Aldrich to abandon policies that they claimed compromised supernatural security for the sake of human sentiment. The training process itself carried significant risks, as Elena discovered when one of her human students experienced magical feedback that temporarily transformed his perception in ways that left him struggling to distinguish between normal human reality and the supernatural energy patterns now visible to his enhanced awareness. Aldrich's decision to issue a royal decree establishing Elena as the first human healing advisor to the vampire court represented a revolutionary change in supernatural governance that sent shockwaves through both human and paranormal political establishments. The decree granted Elena official protection from supernatural law enforcement agencies that might otherwise view her bridgewalker activities as violations of species separation treaties, while also giving her unprecedented authority to intervene in supernatural medical emergencies, regardless of the political sensitivities involved. Traditional vampire nobles reacted with outrage that bordered on rebellion, viewing Aldrich's decision as proof that human influence had corrupted their king's judgment beyond acceptable limits and threatened the fundamental principles of vampire superiority that had guided their civilization for millennia. House Shadowmere formally petitioned the International Vampire Court to overturn Aldrich's decree, claiming that granting humans official authority over supernatural affairs violated the ancient laws that required vampiric governance to remain free from mortal interference. Elena found herself targeted by supernatural supremacist groups who viewed her position as an existential threat to the careful hierarchies that kept vampire society stable, assassination attempts that forced Aldrich to assign permanent bodyguards whose presence made her daily work increasingly difficult. Human medical boards proved equally hostile to Elena's official recognition by vampire authorities, viewing her supernatural appointment as evidence of professional incompetence that justified revoking her nursing license for engaging in medical practices that violated evidence-based standards. The controversy surrounding her position created unprecedented cooperation between human medical establishments and vampire traditionalists. Groups that normally viewed each other as enemies, finding common ground in their opposition to Elena's revolutionary approach to cross-species healing. Despite the political chaos surrounding her appointment, Elena's relationship with Aldrich deepened as they worked together to implement changes that neither could accomplish alone, their collaboration revealing new dimensions of intimacy that transcended the physical attraction that had first drawn them together. Aldrich's centuries of experience with supernatural politics provided essential guidance for navigating the complex resistance to Elena's innovations, while her insights into human medical ethics helped him understand how to frame vampiric healing practices in ways that respected human autonomy and dignity. Their partnership became a living example of the human-vampire cooperation that Elena's Healing Council was designed to formalize, proving that meaningful collaboration between their peoples was not just possible, but essential for addressing threats that neither species could handle independently. However, their growing personal and professional intimacy also made them targets for enemies who understood that destroying their partnership would effectively end the integration movement before it could gain sufficient momentum to become irreversible. Elena's expanding abilities and increasing prominence as a bridgewalker practitioner created effects that extended far beyond her immediate sphere of influence, sending magical signals across dimensional barriers that had remained sealed for centuries through careful supernatural maintenance protocols. Ancient entities imprisoned in pocket dimensions between realities began stirring as Elena's lunar healing energy created resonances that weakened the mystical barriers designed to keep otherworldly threats from invading the material plane. The most dangerous of these awakening entities was the Void Wraith, a creature of pure entropy that fed on healing magic by corrupting it into its opposite, transforming life energy into death force and using the resulting spiritual poison to strengthen itself for eventual escape from its dimensional prison. Elena's massive magical working during Damien's healing had created the largest concentration of Bridgewalker energy in over 5 centuries. A beacon that drew the Void Wraith's attention like blood in the water, attracting supernatural sharks. The creature's attempts to feed on Elena's energy from across dimensional barriers caused subtle disruptions in her healing abilities, moments of doubt and confusion that made her question whether her magic was truly helping or actually causing harm to the patients she treated. Elena realized with growing horror that her enhanced abilities made her both a powerful protector of supernatural community health and a dangerous attractant for cosmic threats that viewed Bridgewalker magic as either food source or tool for dimensional invasion. The Void Wraith's influence began manifesting through corrupted healing attempts in supernatural medical facilities around the world, cases where vampire healing magic suddenly turned destructive, or human patients suffered mysterious deterioration after receiving supernatural medical treatment. Elena's expanded perception allowed her to trace these incidents back to their source, revealing a pattern of dimensional incursion that threatened to tear holes in reality large enough for the Void Wraith to escape its ancient prison and begin feeding directly on the magical energies that sustain supernatural civilization. Aldrich convened emergency meetings with supernatural leaders who had not faced threats of this magnitude since the dimensional wars that ended the medieval period, consulting ancient texts and long-retired magical specialists to develop strategies for containing entities whose power exceeded anything their modern supernatural society was equipped to handle. The revelation that Elena's growing abilities served as both weapon and target in a cosmic conflict made her position even more precarious, as some supernatural factions began arguing that eliminating her might be the only way to prevent the Void Wraith from gaining enough power to escape its dimensional prison and begin the systematic destruction of everything they had built over centuries of careful supernatural development and species cooperation. The dimensional barriers collapsed with the sound of reality itself screaming, as the Void Wraith tore through 5 centuries of magical containment and manifested simultaneously across 17 different locations, where concentrated healing energy provided the sustenance it needed to maintain coherent form in the material plane. Elena felt the creature's emergence like ice water flooding her veins, her enhanced supernatural perception detecting the entity's presence as a wrongness that made every cell in her body recoil from the fundamental corruption it represented. The attacks began within hours of the Void Wraith's escape, human hospitals reporting mysterious equipment failures and patient deterioration that defied all medical explanation, while supernatural healing centers experienced catastrophic magical feedback that turned their protective enchantments into weapons against the very people they were designed to help. Elena raced between crisis sites with Aldrich and Damien, her Bridgewalker abilities allowing her to temporarily stabilize the dimensional distortions the creature left in its wake. But each intervention drained more of her life force, while the Void Wraith grew stronger by feeding on the chaos and suffering it created through its systematic corruption of healing magic across both human and supernatural medical systems. At Metropolitan General Hospital, where Elena had once worked, patients in the intensive care unit began dying as their life support systems turned against them, mechanical ventilators forcing poison into lungs instead of oxygen, while cardiac monitors sent electrical surges through hearts they were meant to protect. The supernatural ward at Ravencrest Medical Center experienced even worse devastation as vampire healing spells reversed their polarity and began draining life energy instead of restoring it, forcing medical staff to choose between watching their patients die slowly from their original conditions or quickly from corrupted magical treatment that had become more dangerous than beneficial. Elena realized with crystal clarity, born from desperate analysis of the creature's feeding patterns, that only her lunar healing abilities possessed the specific magical frequency needed to permanently banish the Void Wraith back to its dimensional prison. But channeling that level of Bridgewalker power would almost certainly kill her, given the massive energy expenditure required to force an entity of cosmic entropy back through barriers it had already proven capable of destroying. The knowledge that she could save countless lives at the cost of her own created the kind of impossible choice that defined heroism. The decision to sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good that separated ordinary people from legends whose stories echoed through centuries of grateful remembrance. Aldrich faced his own agonizing decision as he watched Elena prepare for what amounted to magical suicide, his immortal heart torn between selfish love that wanted to preserve the woman who had become essential to his existence, and the royal duty that demanded he allow her to make whatever sacrifice was necessary to protect both human and supernatural populations from destruction. 3 centuries of kingship had taught him that love and leadership often demanded contradictory choices, but never before had the conflict felt so personal or the stakes so absolute. As he wrestled with whether to support Elena's heroic decision or use his vampiric authority to prevent her from attempting a magical working that would almost certainly end her life. Damien provided the solution that none of them had considered in their focus on individual heroism, his enhanced magical perception revealing that Bridgewalker power could be shared between willing participants if they established proper mystical connections and synchronized their energy outputs to prevent the kind of magical feedback that had originally put him in a coma. The prince proposed combining his inherited healing magic with Elena's lunar healing abilities, creating a mystical partnership that would allow them to generate the power needed to banish the Void Wraith while distributing the lethal energy costs between 2 supernatural practitioners instead of forcing Elena to bear the entire burden alone. The technique required absolute trust and perfect magical synchronization between participants whose life forces would become temporarily merged in ways that could either save them both or kill them together if their energy patterns proved incompatible during the high-stress conditions of cosmic-level magical combat. Elena agreed to Damien's proposal with the grateful relief of someone who had already accepted death, discovering that survival remained possible. While Aldrich added his own vampiric strength to their mystical alliance by offering to serve as an anchor that would keep both Elena and Damien connected to the material plane, while they channeled energies that threatened to scatter their consciousness across multiple dimensional layers. The battle against the Void Wraith transcended normal concepts of physical combat, taking place simultaneously across the material plane, where the creature was feeding, and the magical dimensions, where its true essence resided in forms that conventional weapons could never touch. Elena and Damien joined their consciousness in mystical union that allowed them to perceive the entity's true nature as a wound in reality itself, a cosmic infection that turned healing into harm and life into entropy through sheer proximity to its fundamentally corrupted existence. Their combined lunar healing magic manifested as silver fire that burned without consuming, light that purified without destroying, energy that restored cosmic balance by forcibly separating the Void Wraith's essence from the material plane where it had never belonged. The creature fought back with desperate fury, its attacks taking the form of corrupted healing spells that tried to turn Elena and Damien's magic against them by reversing the polarity of their Bridgewalker abilities and transforming their life-giving power into death-dealing poison that would consume them from within. Aldrich's vampiric strength proved essential for maintaining the mystical barriers that protected Elena and Damien from the Void Wraith's counterattacks, his centuries of experience with magical combat allowing him to recognize and deflect supernatural assaults that would have overwhelmed less experienced practitioners. The battle raged across multiple dimensions simultaneously, manifesting in the physical world as reality distortions that made hospital equipment malfunction in impossible ways and caused supernatural healing centers to experience magical phenomena that defied every known law of mystical physics. At the climax of their cosmic confrontation, Elena and Damien discovered that banishing the Void Wraith required not just overwhelming power, but perfect understanding of the dimensional mechanics that had originally created the creature's prison centuries earlier, knowledge that demanded they temporarily merge their consciousness so completely that they became a single entity capable of wielding Bridgewalker magic at its theoretical maximum potential. The process nearly destroyed both of them, as their individual identities dissolved into pure healing energy that existed simultaneously across every dimensional layer where the Void Wraith had established influence. But their mystical union also granted them access to cosmic forces that allowed them to not just banish the creature, but permanently seal the dimensional rifts that had allowed its escape. The battle ended with the Void Wraith's screaming dissolution as Elena and Damien's combined power forced it back through collapsing dimensional barriers that would never again be weak enough to permit its return, while reality itself seemed to exhale with relief as the fundamental corruption was finally purged from systems that connected human and supernatural realms through the delicate balance of healing magic that Bridgewalker bloodlines had maintained for over a millennium. 6 months after their victory over the Void Wraith, Elena's Healing Council had become the model for supernatural human cooperation worldwide, with integrated medical centers operating on every continent, where human physicians worked alongside vampire healers under protocols that Elena and Damien had developed through their shared experience with cross-species magical collaboration. The success of their revolutionary approach to supernatural medicine had convinced even traditional vampire nobles that cooperation with humans strengthened rather than weakened their people, while human governments that had once viewed supernatural healing practices with suspicion now actively sought partnerships that could enhance their own medical capabilities. Elena accepted Aldrich's proposal to become his queen, not through vampiric transformation that would have destroyed her humanity, but as the first human queen in vampire history, a political decision that formalized the integration policies they had both championed and created a new model for supernatural leadership that valued diversity over purity. Their wedding celebration included representatives from every supernatural faction and human governmental organization that had supported their revolutionary changes to traditional species separation policies. A gathering that would have been impossible before Elena's Bridgewalker abilities had proven that cooperation between realms could create strength rather than vulnerability. Damien had evolved into a powerful healer whose abilities surpassed even his mother's legendary skills, serving as an ambassador to young supernatural beings who struggled with abilities that traditional vampire society had no framework for understanding or supporting. While his experience with magical transformation made him uniquely qualified to guide others through the psychological adjustments required when consciousness expanded beyond normal human or vampire parameters. Elena continued her work as both a trauma nurse at human hospitals and a Bridgewalker practitioner at supernatural medical centers, proving that bridging two worlds did not require abandoning either, but instead demanded the courage to create new traditions that honored the best aspects of both while discarding the limitations that fear and prejudice had imposed on earlier generations. Her teaching responsibilities included training the next generation of healers who would carry forward the integration model that Elena, Aldrich, and Damien had established through their willingness to risk everything for the possibility that love and cooperation could triumph over ancient patterns of separation and mistrust. The story concluded with Elena standing before her newest class of students, a mixed group that included human nurses interested in supernatural medicine, young vampires who preferred healing to traditional vampiric pursuits, and hybrid beings whose mixed heritage made them natural bridges between different magical systems, while Aldrich watched from the doorway with the pride of someone who had witnessed impossible dreams become sustainable reality. Elena began her lesson with the same lullaby she had once sung to save a dying prince. But now the ancient melody served as an opening meditation that helped her students access the empathic connections needed for successful cross-species healing. The song that had once bound a single life to hope, now serving as a bridge between worlds, for everyone brave enough to believe that healing was stronger than hatred and love more powerful than the fear that had once kept their peoples apart. Aldrich joined his voice to Elena's as the lesson progressed, their harmony echoing through corridors that had once known only silence and shadow, but now rang with the laughter of children from multiple species learning together, the sound of a future where the divisions that had once seemed permanent had been transformed into bridges that connected rather than separated, healing rather than harming, building rather than destroying the world their love had made possible.